As it turns out, England and Europe weren't the only civilizations 1,000 years ago or so that had feudalism. Feudalism was an important part of European history. This chart of basic social structure shows the peasants at the bottom, knights above them, and above the knights would be the lords and ladies, the nobles, and at the very top, the king and queen. However, this social setup was not unique just to Europe. It is fun to think about and kind of crazy to think about that the same kind of structure was existing about 8,500 miles away in Japan at the same time. So as you look at this map of Asia, and you can see Japan next to the Koreas, North Korea, South Korea, China. These are major players in modern Asia. But if we think about Japan 1,000 years ago, it had a very similar structure to the feudalist society in England, in France, and other parts of Europe. So a quick review of the nation of Japan. The nation of Japan today is over 14,000 islands, 14,125 islands to be exact. But there are 4 main islands. And of course, most people in Japan live on the big island of Honshu. This is where you would find Tokyo and Kyoto, Osaka, these bigger cities. And modern Japan is a vibrant nation with a thriving economy, one of the strongest economies on earth, that one of the highest standards of living, meaning people who live there live long and they are happy and they have a lot of modern amenities and modern technology, good health care, good food. But Japan 1,000 years ago was very similar to, say, English feudal society. The Japanese were structured in a way very similar to the way the English were structured. In 794, the Emperor of Japan moved the capital to the city that would be known as Kyoto. Today, Kyoto is still an important city in Japan, but the capital today is Tokyo. Over time, in ancient Japan, nobles gave land to warriors who agreed to fight for them. These warriors became known as samurai. In battle, samurai fought on horseback with swords, daggers, and bows and arrows. They wore armor made of leather or of steel scales and helmets with horns or crests. So if we look at the structure of ancient Japan 1,000 years ago, just like in England and just like in France and in Europe, peasants are at the bottom. So there were Japanese peasants then. But above the peasants were this type of warrior that might be considered a Japanese version of a knight. These samurai were the Japanese equivalent of the knights of the Middle Ages. So around the year 1200, samurais, these Japanese knights, become an important part of Japanese society. The word samurai means to serve. The samurai lived by a strict code of conduct. This code was called the Bushido, or the way of the warrior. It demanded that a samurai be loyal to his master. The samurai must also be brave and honorable. Samurai were not supposed to be concerned about riches or worldly things. They viewed merchants as lacking in honor. Bound to these principles, a samurai would rather die in battle than betray his master. He also did not want to suffer the disgrace of being captured in battle. This sense of loyalty that set apart the samurai lasted until modern times. During World War II, Many Japanese soldiers fought to the death rather than accept defeat or capture. The Japanese have since begun to turn away from some of the beliefs of the samurai. The samurai and the knight have many things in common. There are some things that they have that are different. You can check this Venn diagram for the samurai and the knight. You can see that they have some things in common. It's helpful to think of the samurai as the Japanese knights from 1,000 years ago or so. But the samurai weren't the only part of Japanese society. Above the samurai was the shogun, the military commander. The first shogun was Minamoto Yoritomo in around the year 1192. He's the first recorded commander of military forces that would have the title of shogun. The military government under the shogun was known as the shogunate. And for about the next 700 years, shoguns ran Japan's government. So while Japan had an emperor, in fact, there's been 126 emperors going back to around 500 or 600 BC, the emperor was more of a figurehead and left the day-to-day running of Japan to the shoguns, these military commanders who had, you may say, kingdoms. So you had the emperor, but the shoguns would rule the land. The country was soon divided into smaller territories under the shoguns, and they would be headed by powerful military lords known as the daimyo. The daimyo were the military lords who basically assisted the shogun. So this group, the daimyos, would be maybe the assistants to the shoguns or one step below in power, but oftentimes the shogun and the daimyo would be listed in the same social strata or same layer. As you can see from this chart, the emperor at top, the shogun and daimyo below that, the samurai. And according to this chart, peasants and artisans were really not much or on the same level as the merchants. Apparently, there wasn't a lot of honor in someone who sold things in ancient Japanese culture. Of course, modern Japan today is a world economic power. And so being a merchant and a manufacturer in Japan today is not what it once was. Companies like Honda and Toyota and Sony, these are major companies that have major impacts around the world. Modern Japan does not really have the ancient feudal society. They do not have samurais or shoguns today. But there was a time, 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, where the emperor relied on the shoguns and the daimyo and the samurai to keep order and provide protection for the people living in Japan in the Empire of Japan. Today, there's still an emperor of Japan, Emperor Naruhito. But again, there have been 126 emperors going back over 2,000 years, 2,500 years or so. But the emperor today does not have any real power, the same way that the king of the United Kingdom is more of a figurehead, and really the emperor and the king, they are the heads of state, meaning they are the official representatives of the nation. But they allow the people to vote for representatives in Japan. those who make the laws are part of what's called the Diet, which sounds weird, but it's the lawmaking body in Japan. And also, the people of Japan choose a prime minister to be the head of government, the same way that the United Kingdom chooses a prime minister to be the head of government. The emperor is the head of state. The prime minister is the head of government. Prime ministers come and go. Emperors usually are more lasting just because it's a title that is inherited and they have it for their life. And even today, people in Japan believe that the Japanese emperor is descendant from a deity or gods. But the prime minister, currently Prime Minister Ishiba, will run the government of Japan. While Japan may be a modern nation, the same way that the United Kingdom is a modern nation, the same way that France is a modern nation, if we go back 1,000 years, much of the societal structure with peasants, and above peasants, knights and samurai, above them fighting to provide protection and provide security to the people living in Japan. Many of the samurai were vassals, meaning they gave their oath of loyalty to the daimyo above them. It's very similar to the feudalism that was in Western Europe. But modern Japan today is a thriving democracy, even though they still technically have an emperor.